Any questions about anything that we covered or that you read for this week or anything? I have not graded your presentations from last week yet, but I will have grades in tomorrow for those. So sorry about that.
I think I forgot to send you mine. I do. Oh my gosh. I have to
Yeah.
send you. Hold on.
If you didn't send it to me, go ahead and send it to me. That's fine. I have recordings of most of them. And
do you want me to send it to you like on, is there a Moodle spot or do you just email it?
You can just email it.
Okay.
And if that won't work, I can put a Moodle spot on there.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss, like, it didn't say incomplete or something on a Moodle.
No, that's cool.
Okay.
Okay. So any questions about anything? All right. Then what we're going to do is we are going to do 2 lectures. Chapter 4 is developmental and learning theories. And this is one of my favorite things because, again, it's the basis of why we do the things that we do with kids. And it will help you understand a little bit better what the thinking is behind some of the practices. I was just reading an article yesterday about, and we talked about this a little bit last week, how much what we do in early childhood is informed by sort of a white Western European male perspective, and a white Western European male from the 1920s to the 1970s kind of perspective. And so there's some push in early childhood research and learning to maybe think about all of these theories a little bit more critically and think about, are we really serving everyone when we talk about and think about children in these ways? You know, a lot of the research that this stuff is based on was conducted with, you know, white middle class kids. And so is it really serving everyone? And I think it's important to think of that as we go through this and think about the sort of ages of these people, and that so much of what they were doing is theoretical. It's and a lot of it comes from like Piaget, which we spend a lot of time, we talk about Piaget all the time. It comes from a psychology perspective and not necessarily a nurturing and care perspective. So it's just kind of interesting and important to think about that as we talk about all this stuff. Does it change what we do? Maybe not. Maybe it helps us understand our own thinking a little bit differently. I think that, you know, 10, 15 years ago, early childhood scholars would say, oh yeah, you know, this is why we do things. This is the way it is. And I think there's a little bit more focus now on, well, let's question that theory a little bit and just wonder if this is the only way. So having said that, we'll dive into what your textbook says and what I'm supposed to teach you. And maybe somewhere along the line, someone will go, wow, you know what? I love teaching kids, or I love doing this, but what I really want to do is research. And somebody can go get their PhD in early childhood development and, you know, challenge all of our beliefs and maybe come up with something new. Who knows? Okay, so let's see if I can do the old screen share. I can't see it, but can you see it?
Yes. Yeah, we can.
I have too many tabs open on this screen. Hold up a second. Let me see if I can close some things. It's distracting. Okay. So developmental and learning theories. What we think and why we think it and how we put it into practice. There we go. So the basic principles of development, this is on page 72 in your book, that all areas of development and learning are important, related, and influence each other. So all of the learning and development that kids are doing is important, and it all flows into each other, and it's all related. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. Kids are not just developing one thing, they're developing everything. And your language skill development and your cognitive development, I've talked about this a million times, are that influences your vocabulary development. So it all is intertwined, and it's when you stop and think about it, again, from 0 to 5, like, it's crazy what little human beings learn and are capable of doing. We talked about this before. Learning and development follow sequences, right? So generally you crawl before you walk, although not always. Generally you talk before you read. Development and learning proceed at varying rates. Early experiences have profound effects on development and learning. We know that. We know that the things that happen to you when you're a little kid impact the rest of your life. And I think there's more focus on this even now than there was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. We know how important, especially 0 to 3 is, and how we need to offer kids the best things during those years to help their brains develop, to help their skills develop, etc. Generally, we go from least complex to most complex. So, just like you are writing just marks on a page to being able to control what you're writing, it all follows along in a continuum. They're influenced by multiple social and cultural contexts. We'll talk about this a little bit when we talk about specifically like Vygotsky, and then when we talk about developmentally appropriate practice. Their experiences shape their motivations and approaches to learning. This is key. As people who are caring for and teaching young children, we need to make it a positive experience so that they love learning and want to continue learning, because they're going to have to do it no matter what, right? So we want those first years of school to be appealing and interesting and fun, and also valuable. So development and learning result from an interaction of maturation and experience. You don't just do things because you are 3, you do things because of the experiences that you've had between 0 and 3, and the fact that you're 3. So you're maturing and you're just naturally developing abilities and skills, but also your experiences are influencing that. Play, we all know play is important. And I think that, and I don't know if I've said this to you all, but I think it's important that we think of play as experiences. And often people don't understand when we say play, that's what we mean. We don't mean just playing games and playing with toys. We mean having experiences with things. Development and learning advance when children are challenged. I think that the 2 words that I most like to use when I talk about working with young children are challenge and nurture. You want to challenge them. You want them to have a little bit of difficulty. You want them to have to struggle a little bit, because when they do that, their achievement is that much more valuable. But you also want to be there to say, look, I know you can do it. You're smart, you're clever, you're capable, you know how to do this. Let's see if we can do it together. So challenge and nurture, that's your job. That's your job. Like, that's everybody's job. It's a mom's job, it's a dad's job, it's a teacher's job, it's a principal's job, it's a professor's job. That's what we need to do with each other. Let's see, where are we? Children learn in a variety of ways, and then they develop best when they have secure relationships. So all of these things are the basic principles of development. And all of these things are the things that you need to keep in mind when you're working with young children. So again, your book talks about the developmental domains as a 3 tier thing: physical, motor, affective, intellectual. So physical, social, emotional, and cognitive. I really prefer to split language out of cognitive because it's so unique, but I've already told you that a million times. So your textbook says this, so that's what we go with. The major issues in development are maturation versus experience. So like I said before, you develop certain things because you're 3, because of the way your physical body is developing, the way your brain is developing, but experiences also impact that. Nature versus nurture. Anybody who's been around long enough knows it's not one or the other, it's both, right? And then smooth and continuous or stages. So are you just developing smoothly from one stop to another, or are there discrete stages where certain things are happening? And it's both. It's all like learning and developing. It's everything. So, you know what a theory is? It's an idea about something, an explanation about how things work. And what we're going to talk about is a bunch of different theories put forth by a bunch of different guys. So, starting with psychoanalytic theory, and this is really based on the idea that development is based on your experiences and things that happen to you. So, Freud talked about personality development and emotional problems, and how the way you were treated and the way you understood what was happening around you impacts your development and can cause um, flaws in your personality or weirdness and emotional problems. Um, and then Erik Erikson, who is, somebody that all early childhood people know and talk about, really talked about development in stages. And his, first, Sigmund Freud. Freud's been a little bit discredited because so much of his stuff is based on sexual stuff. And many theorists and researchers think that maybe he was a little too focused on that. So, one thing that Freud did give to us was the idea of talking through concerns and issues as a way of working them out. So, um, Erikson has the psychosocial development stages. He talked about how people relate to each other and problems on a social level, and he coined the term identity crisis. His idea was that as children are developing, they're constantly going through this identity crisis of who they are and how they fit in with the world around them. And that development happens throughout the lifespan. So the stages that we think about most in early childhood are basic trust versus mistrust, which is birth to 18 months. And trust develops when needs are met consistently and predictably. So one of the things that we talk about a lot, especially when we're working with infants and toddlers, is consistency. You want to, for instance, in a childcare setting, you want to have the same teachers or caregivers with young children all the time to give them that consistency. You want to have a schedule, and it may not necessarily be a schedule that's based on the clock, but a schedule that's based on what happens next. After I give you a bottle, I put you down for a nap. Those are the things that make children feel comfortable, and they help develop trust. When they don't have that, that's when they develop mistrust. So, when parents or caregivers don't respond to them, that hinders development, right? So, one of the things that we talk about when we're talking specifically with infants and toddlers is that that you always respond. You may not always do exactly what that child wants you to do at that moment, because you can't, but you need to show them that you know that they're there and that they need something, and you'll get to them soon. So if you're like in a nursery at a child care center and you have babies crying, and your caregivers in the nursery aren't talking to them while they're doing something else, that's kind of a problem. They may be, changing somebody's diaper and somebody else is crying. They need to be saying, "Oh, yeah, I hear you, Jaden. I hear you. I'm going to get to you in just a minute," because that's helping develop that trust, right? Stage two, autonomy versus shame and doubt. So at 18 months to 3 years, this is when children start working on being independent, right? At 18 months, as soon as they can get up, start walking, and then start talking, that's when they start trying to sort of push boundaries and try new things. So toddlers either learn to be self-sufficient or doubt their abilities. So what do we do to help them learn to be self-sufficient? We set up areas for them to be successful. So we set up the classroom in a way that allows them to move around independently and not fall down and hurt themselves and not, injure other people. Um, my toddler room at my old school, every classroom in my preschool was set up in such a way that there weren't like big places for people to move around. There were smaller areas so that you couldn't run freely, except the toddler room. The toddler room was like wide open space because those kids need to be able to move around without running into things. What they did then was they would just climb up the bookshelves because all the bookshelves were against the walls. But as long as they were doing it safely and not hurting each other, it's okay, because it also helped them feel like, hey, I can do this thing. So, autonomy versus shame and doubt. An interesting thing is 18 months to 3 years is often a time when people are starting to potty train. And so it's really important at this point to help them be successful. Now, having said that, I would not start potty training anybody until they're 3 years old, but that's just me. So we're going to see a little short film about Erik Erikson's first 4 stages. Actually, this one goes through the whole 8 stages of psychosocial development, and we'll talk a little bit about it after. Now, can you see that it's going to YouTube?
Erikson's theory of psychosocial development identifies 8 stages which a healthy individual should pass through from birth to death. At each stage, we encounter different needs, ask new questions, and meet people who influence our behavior and learning. Stage 1. Basic trust versus mistrust. As infants, we ask ourselves if we can trust the world, and we wonder if it's safe. We learn that if we can trust someone now, we can also trust others in the future. If we experience fear, we develop doubt and mistrust. The key to our development is our mother. Stage 2. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. In our early childhood, we experience ourselves and discover our body. We ask, is it okay to be me? If we are allowed to discover ourselves, then we develop self-confidence. If we are not, we can develop shame and self-doubt. Both parents now play a major role. Stage 3. Initiative versus guilt. In preschool, we take initiative, try out new things, and learn basic principles like how round things roll. We ask, is it okay for me to do what I do? If we are encouraged, we can follow our interests. If we are held back or told that what we do is silly, we can develop guilt. We are now learning from the entire family. Stage 4. Industry versus inferiority. Now we discover our own interests and realize that we are different from others. We want to show that we can do things right. We ask if we can make it in this world. If we receive recognition from our teachers or peers, We become industrious, which is another word for hardworking. If we get too much negative feedback, we start to feel inferior and lose motivation. Our neighbors and schools now influence us the most. Stage 5. Identity versus role confusion. During adolescence, we learn that we have different social roles. We are friends, students, children, and citizens. Many experience an identity crisis. If our parents now allow us to go out and explore, we can find identity. If they push us to conform to their views, we can face role confusion and feel lost. Key to our learning are our peers and role models. Stage 6. Intimacy versus isolation. As young adults, we slowly understand who we are, and we start to let go of the relationships we had built earlier in order to fit in. We ask ourselves if we can love. If we can make a long-term commitment, we are confident and happy. If we cannot form intimate relationships, we might end up feeling isolated and lonely. Our friends and partners are now central to our development. Stage 7. Generativity versus stagnation. When we reach our 40s, we become comfortable, use our leisure time creatively, and maybe begin contributing to society. Our concern is generativity. If we think that we are able to lead the next generation into this world, we are happy. If we did not resolve some conflicts earlier, we can become pessimistic and experience stagnation. People at home and at work are now who influences the most. Stage 8. Ego integrity versus despair. As we grow older, we tend to slow down and begin to look back over our lives. We ask, how have I done? If we think we did well, we develop feelings of contentment and integrity. If not, we can experience despair and become grumpy and bitter. Time to compare us with mankind. Erik Erikson was a German-American psychologist who, together with his wife Joan, became known for his work on psychosocial development. He was influenced by Sigmund and Anna Freud and became famous for coining the phrase identity crisis. Although Erikson lacked even a bachelor's degree, he served as a professor at Harvard and Yale.
Okay, so I just realized that I only have 2 stages left, which kind of made me a little sad. I've been, my parents are old, and so I hang out with a lot of old people, and I'm constantly sort of amazed at how like old people in that last stage have so many of the same sort of characteristics as like the first stage. Like they're physically and cognitively, like they're losing their language skills, they're losing their physical development. It's really crazy to like understand how children develop and then watch how old people like develop or undevelop. Anyway, I would love to write like a research paper on language development in young children and loss of language in old people because it's fascinating. So anyway, initiative versus guilt, 3 to 5 years. This is the kids at the playground who want to go off and do their own thing, but they also want to know that you're sitting there in case they need you. So this is when they are going off and doing things and checking in with you and making sure that you're still there, but you're not interfering in what's going on. And then industry versus inferiority, they are learning to do things on their own. They're doing things by themselves. They are being able to come up with their own stuff to do. So like you don't have to be the tour guide all the time, the cruise director. And your job at that point is to step back and let them. So from stage 1, you know, where you have to be hands-on and do everything, each stage you get to step back a little bit, and you should step back a little bit and let them do what they need to do. Any questions about any of that? Okay, then I'm just going to keep rambling on. Behaviorism. Much of what we do, much of how we understand getting children to do what we want them to do is based in behaviorism. And conditioning is a hallmark of behaviorism. I don't know who you've heard of in this group, but we'll talk about Pavlov, Watson, Skinner, Thorndike, and Bandura, and then we'll talk about Piaget a little bit later and his conditioning things. So behaviorists believe that children are a clean slate. So there's not stuff there that you have to work with. Like you're kind of giving them everything. Only behaviors can be treated. So you can't change people's feelings with this, but you can change their behaviors. So you've probably heard about Pavlov's dogs, right? Pavlov was a psychologist, I think, who conditioned his dogs. When he rang a bell, he would give them steak. And then, so what would happen is when he rang the bell, their mouths would start to water, right? I'll give you, actually, we'll go ahead a little bit to understand this. Okay, so there are different ways of conditioning, and I'm just going to show you this because it's fascinating. This is Albert Bandura, who was, I think this is Albert Bandura. No, it's not. I'm sorry. This was Pavlov, I guess, who did research with young children that is highly unethical. If you did this today, you would most likely be in prison. So he wanted to see if he could condition a child to be afraid of animals. Okay. And this is part of why there's some kind of questioning about these theories now. Like, was it really okay for him to do this thing and do this to this kid? So we're just going to watch this and we'll talk about it a little bit.
It takes a very specific set of properties to create a successful drug, and they're not.
Is there sound to this? Because I don't hear anything. Okay, just making sure, because it said something about a noise, so I wasn't quite sure.
Okay, let me tell you a little bit about what that was. So he decided he would condition little Albert, see if he could condition little Albert to be afraid. Okay, first of all, that's a problem right there. Like, what are you doing? Right? Every time I watch that, I just cringe. So the baby was what? I think he was about 9 months old. And what he did was he introduced little Albert to a bunch of different things. You saw him a monkey, a dog, a rat. I can't remember what else he showed him. A rabbit. Anyway, he showed him all of these things and he let him touch them and all that stuff. And it was just fine. And the kid was okay with it. And then what he did was every time he introduced him to, or he brought the same animals back, every time he brought the animals back, and there's video of this, but I can't find it anymore. He took two big lead pipes and he banged them together over the baby's head while he showed him the animals. So the baby then correlated the animal with this scary sound, and he did it enough that he changed the child's behavior, which, like, there's no way you could do this now, right? It's so abusive. And it's interesting. One of my students a couple of years ago, was like, well, what happened to baby Albert? Was he scared of animals for the rest of his life? And it turns out he kind of was. He was kind of messed up because of this research. But what he was trying to prove was that you can change behavior by conditioning it. So at first, the baby, he was like, oh, this a nice furry thing. And then at the end, when he comes up with the clown face mask or whatever, and the baby's scared out of his, what, you can, clearly it worked. What he set out to do worked. It's really interesting doing research with young children is hard to do, which is why we still rely on a lot of the things that, we think we learned years and years ago. And it's also every person is different and has different experiences. So you may have replicated that with another child and the banging may not have made a difference. We don't know. So again, it's interesting to see how these theories came about and wonder how would we do that today? Would we come up with the same conclusions? So behaviorism and behavioral theories promote learning through rewards and punishment, emphasize experiences and environment, and change in behavior as a function of learning. So what we're doing is we're saying, this is the thing that you're doing. We want you to do this thing. So what do we have to do to change your behavior? We can punish you by beating a lead pipe above your head, or we can give you rewards. But we know that there are ways to change behavior, right? My dog is blind and has diabetes, and he has to have a shot every day, twice a day. And he knows now when we call him at certain times of the day that he's going to get his shot. So we've conditioned him to not want to come when we call him. And my husband figured out the other day that he can't resist the doorbell. Like the dog cannot resist the doorbell because over time, I mean, like even on TV, when he hears a doorbell, he starts barking and runs to the TV. So now every morning he's been conditioned when my husband rings the doorbell at 8 o'clock, the dog comes and he gets his shot. Now, and then we give him a treat, right? So he gets a reward too. If we were just giving him the shot, there's a chance that, because he's pretty smart, after a while, he'd realize, like, every time that doorbell rings at this time in the morning, I get a shot and I don't like that. So I'm not going to do that anymore. But I think, old dog, new tricks. Like I think it would be hard to condition that behavior out of him. But that's what we're talking about. That's conditioning. So the behaviorists believe learning occurs when an organism interacts with an environment through experience. Behavior is changed or modified. That's what we just talked about. So the learner is conditioned to give a response when exposed to stimuli. So what he did with baby Albert was he exposed him to the animals, right? And then he changed his behavior by exposing him to the animals and banging the lead pipe. Those are not things you should be doing with young children. You should be doing things like singing songs to indicate to them now it's time to clean up, or sometimes turning on the lights or whatever. These are stimuli that indicate to children that they should do something different, right? They should have a response. Or I think we kind of think that doing punishments like timeout might condition a child not to do something, but it hasn't really been shown that it's that helpful to change a behavior. What a timeout generally does is stops a behavior and gives a child a chance to reset. Classical conditioning can account for development of phobias, right? Operant conditioning focuses on the response rather than the stimuli. So you're reinforcing the response, like giving a sticker for pottying. Punishment makes it more likely the behavior will not occur again, like physical punishment, spanking, or timeout. But punishment is not often the most effective way to change behavior. And then negative reinforcement is when I don't want to do something, so I figure out a way to get out of it, right? And then I get out of it. So like I said, like with my dog, his reinforcement for coming to the doorbell is that he gets a treat, right? His punishment for coming to the doorbell is that he gets a shot. So he's kind of in between there. And then modeling. This is observational learning. You need to model the kind of behavior that you want to see. People will be more likely to do the things that you want them to do if you are modeling that behavior. And if you are being warm and affectionate with whoever you're in charge of. Okay. When behavior is rewarded, it continues. When behavior is not rewarded or ignored, the behavior will stop. Most of the time, if a child is exhibiting some sort of challenging behavior, you can ignore it unless it's something that is harming others or himself, and it will go away. Most of the time, a challenging behavior is because a child doesn't have something that they need. And a lot of times that's attention, right? So rewarding that behavior with a lot of yelling and screaming and attention may have negative consequences because it may teach the child, well, when I do this challenging behavior, then they pay attention to me, right? So what we talk about when we're talking about behaviors is applied behavior analysis. What is the function of the behavior? Why is the child doing this thing? What does the child want? What is this behavior that the child is doing trying to get, right? Sometimes it's attention. Sometimes it's, I need something. Sometimes it's, I want to tell you something. So what can you change, or how can you prevent that challenging behavior? Okay, now Albert Bandura. This is social learning theory. This is another theorist, Albert Bandura. He talked about how children learn by seeing what people are doing around them through modeling and observation and vicarious experiences. So vicarious experiences being experiences that are not involved in, but they see happening around them. And he also talked about self-regulation. And self-regulation is being able to understand how you're reacting to something and change it or not. So he did a thing called the Bobo experiment, which we will see.
When you mute, we can't hear it.
Okay, I was afraid that it would like distort. Okay, so did you get that? He had 66 nursery school children, and he had them with like a big rubber doll, and he had adults interacting with the doll in specific ways, and he wanted to see how he showed them a film of the adult kicking and punching the doll, and he wanted to see how the children would react to that and what their behavior would be after seeing this modeled behavior. So they saw an adult kicking and punching a doll, and then they saw that adult being rewarded by a different adult, and then they saw an adult telling off the kicker and puncher for doing that aggressive behavior, and then they saw one who wasn't punished or rewarded, and then this is what happened.
My initial research and observational learning centered on the social modeling of aggression. In our experiment, preschool children observed an adult model beat up an inflated boba doll in novel ways. She pummeled it with a mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, and threw it down and beat it. And these novel acts were embellished with hostile remarks. The children were then left in the playroom that had a variety of toys. Now, the children who had observed the aggressive modeling adopted much of it. They even invented new ways for attacking the doll. Children who had not observed the adult model were less aggressive and never hit the boba doll in the novel ways that were modeled. The children who had been exposed to the aggressive modeling showed an increased attraction to guns, even though the adult model never used them. At the time we did this research, it was widely believed that seeing others venting aggression would drain away the viewer's aggressive drive. As you can see, exposure to modeled aggression is hardly cathartic. Televised violence has four major effects. It teaches aggressive styles of behavior, weakens restraints over aggression, desensitizes and habituates viewers to human cruelty, and shapes viewers' images of reality. With the enormous advances in the technology of communication, observational learning from the symbolic environment is placing an increasingly powerful role in people's everyday lives. Human attitudes, values, styles of behavior are now being modeled worldwide. As a result, televised modeling is becoming an influential vehicle for political and social change. We now have global broadcasts of societal conflicts as they are happening.
Okay, so that fascinates me, that the kids who didn't see adults modeling aggressive behavior didn't do aggressive behavior, right? So think about that. And then think about, I mean, this is old. This just talks about TV. When you think about, like, for instance, video games where your whole goal is to shoot a bunch of people and a bunch of things, what kind of impact does that have on an adolescent brain? You know, when it is not realistic, but you're still doing an action that's symbolic, how does that work? So one of the things that we talk about a lot with preschoolers, and I want to hear what you all have to say about this, is what about guns in the classroom, in a preschool or early grade school classroom? Do you all have experiences with that, and what are your experiences?
Well, I know that like where I work, you can't have guns in the classroom. Um, I don't know if you know that I'm prior service Marine Corps. So for me, it's very different. My mom, I was raised with no weapons, yet I was the best shooter in my platoon. So I guess it's just very different aspect for me. I think anything taught well is taught good. Safety and things like that. I'm not saying we should have guns in the classroom. Don't get me that. What I am saying is that we aren't even allowed water guns in the classroom. There's a purpose for certain things. Like we've taken, so even certain things that you would find in a daycare, you don't find in a preschool classroom because of Eckers. You can't have axes and knife, like even like certain fake steak knives, things like that, you cannot have in the classroom because the children that we get have so much trauma in their life that they would reenact items or things they've seen on TV. And to correct those takes time away from learning per se what they want us to teach. And so taking that aspect out, like or if you order like off Lakeshore, just plain and simple, if you order Lakeshore firefighter, they're going to send you a little black plastic axe. At our school, I run all the gym equipment. I cannot put that axe with the activities. And so it's really kind of interesting to see that how it's limited because of the clientele that we use or we have, or it's limited per curriculum or things like that. There's often times where even with in housekeeping, you have a child who's, spanking the baby or putting like it reenacting things sexually that they've seen or haven't seen. And so it's very much I think it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. So I think it's good, but I think teaching prevention would be better than eliminating it altogether, if that makes any sense. Not necessarily with guns, but with anything.
Right.
I think teaching children that are reenacting how mom threw the couch out the window, like literally we had a kid throw a chair and said, well, mom did that yesterday. And I'm like, okay, well, we're at school and I'm sorry your couch is in the living room or, is in the front porch now, but we're
Right.
not going to throw it across, just teaching those things because they're not getting it from home.
Right.
They're learning at home. It's okay when you get mad to throw a chair. That's not okay. But
Right.
we need to remind them. I don't want them going home and saying, well, my teacher said you're not supposed to be throwing your chair, mom. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is just preventing them from reenacting the bad habits of people and try to prevent that by teaching prevention and things like that. So I'm really kind of biased on the, like, I think water guns are great, because, but then kids that are seeing, in this area of town, like in this town particularly, they're like friends are getting shot and stuff. So going pew pew isn't great. Like, so we carry squirt bottles that kind of look like,
Yeah.
but they see the bottle. So
Yeah.
it's very difficult to make that decision. Like I said, I come from a military background, so it's hard for me. My kids go shooting all the time, but we go in a safe place environment and they know the rules. So it's hard for me to make that distinction.
So anybody else have, because I'll tell you what we used to do at my school. Anybody have anything else that their experiences they want to know? So the problem is often you can take away the guns, but that doesn't mean they're not going to find ways to make guns out of the stuff that they have at school, right? We've all seen, ours made guns out of Legos or out of sticks or whatever, because it's just a thing they see and they do. So our rule was, we didn't have, I mean, we wouldn't have like pretend guns in the classroom or on the playground. But because we knew that they were going to make guns because it's a thing that kids do, we had rules. We talked about, even with 3-year-olds, like there are a lot of rules when people have
Yeah, you
guns.
can't point them at
Right. You
people.
can't point them at people. You only point at the ground, or you point at, it was difficult sometimes because, we have kids whose dads are hunters or whatever.
Right.
So
Then
they
that's, yeah, that's hard.
Right. So, but you don't point them at people. And so instead of saying no guns and pretending like that's not a thing,
Right.
we said, look, we know that there are guns around, and what we need to know to teach kids is that you don't point them at people. If you, even with 3-year-olds, if you see a gun, you don't touch it. You tell somebody. And when we had, where they were pretending to have guns on the playground or whatever, we would always talk about, this is not a thing that kids are allowed to play with. And, we can pretend, but it's not. And so,
Well,
go ahead.
no, it's very difficult because like even at our level, we have so many restrictions. We're not even allowed to do like the gingerbread man. If Eckers is like planning on visiting that year, like we have to remove those books from the classroom because it doesn't end well. So it's like a scary thought. So like Gingerbread Man, Billy Goat Scruff, like those that like Three Blind Mice. Oh my gosh, have you ever listened to the words of that thing? Like it's some of these natural, normal nursery rhymes
Right.
that don't have happy endings because there's so much trauma in their lives already. They don't want to instigate it. And I understand. However, I think that takes the imagination out of, like, really, is there going to be a gingerbread cookie running around?
Right.
No, neither is a leprechaun, but we don't stop him from running around the
Right.
school.
It's
So it's
important that they understand that they understand what's real and what's not real. And also that bad things can happen, but it's not there are good things too. And so I think you're right. I think that we spend a lot of time protecting kids from stuff when we should be explaining things to them.
like they don't even let us have dinosaurs at certain times of the year. Like that is prehistoric. That is history,
And it's
trying to remove that because they're scary. Well, we're trying to get, like, it's grant funded, so we have to fall into certain things, but it's the point, like this is history. Why are we taking it out? And that I get frustrated when people take things out of history because the kids these days are not going to know so much. And we're eliminating that at the level in which they will never know.
right. Right. And, yeah, dinosaurs were scary, but they haven't been around for millions of years. So, all right, we're going to move on to cognitive theory and constructivism. So, this is children are playing an active role in their development, in their own understanding and learning. So, this is how children learn, when they learn, and what they learn. And we know that this theory is maturational and environmental. Like I said before, you're developing skills because you're growing, but you're also developing skills because of the environment that you're in. Piaget, we talk about Piaget a lot. He had a theory of cognitive development, how children think, learn, and understand. They actively seek knowledge. Piaget believed that children are constantly looking around and trying to learn about the world around them. And teachers' jobs is to understand what they know and build on that. So active learning is play, learning through physical activity, hands-on learning. And then the Piaget's cognitive development theory has different stages. I'm not going to explain all of this. It's all in your book. We'll look at the next slide and it will tell us a little bit more about it. Schema are the units of knowledge that you have, and through processes of assimilation and accommodation, you change the schema. So Santiago's initial schema is that he knows how to ride a three-wheeler, okay? And then he rides it with training wheels for the first time, and he uses his motor processes to figure out how that works, right? That's the adaptation process. So then he's switching to a two-wheeler with training wheels. So then he uses his old schema of riding the three-wheeler and figures out how to do it with the bike with training wheels, and he becomes proficient at that. So he's adapted. And then his dad takes off. Oh, and then he into the assimilation. He assimilates the skills of riding with the training wheels. And then his dad takes the training wheels off. And that's disequilibrium. And he can't do it the way he did before. So he has to figure out how to do it a new way. And he builds on what he knew about riding with the three-wheeler and with the training wheels. He modifies that knowledge, and he has accommodated a new skill, a new knowledge, and can ride the new bicycle. So he goes through this process of his initial schema, he adapts that, he assimilates new stuff into it, then disequilibrium, everything changes, and then he builds more knowledge and accommodates the new skill. Okay, so that's how that works. Piaget also had stages of development. Sensory motor is the thing that you need to remember about sensory motor is this is birth to two. These people can't do anything on their own. So they're learning about the world. They can't read a book about it. They can't watch a TV show about it. They learn by touching and putting things in their mouths, essentially. That's how they learn about the world. Sensory motor. They are the middle of the universe. They are the most important thing in the world. And everything around them, everything they touch, everything they see is how they're learning. From birth to two, this is when children learn object permanence. Object permanence is that things exist even when I can't see them. A little tiny baby, when the mom leaves, thinks, oh my God, she's gone forever. She'll never come back. Between birth and two, they realize just because they can't see you doesn't mean you're gone forever. This is why it's important to play like peekaboo with little kids. It teaches them that just because your face isn't there anymore doesn't mean that you've disappeared from the universe. So I can't remember how long this one is. If it's too long, we will maybe not watch the whole thing, but this is Piaget's. Oh, it's 6 minutes. We'll see. Sensory motor stage, birth to two.
New babies aren't quite sure what happens to objects when they leave their sight. Sky's mom keeps disappearing and reappearing. No wonder peekaboo is so much fun. During their first year, however, infants will learn an important concept: object permanence. Everything has a life of its own, even if it is out of sight.
At Maya's age, babies know to look for the object, but they might not have everything else straight. 10-month-old Simon is about to make a classic mistake. Although he watched us place the toy plane under the white cloth, he'll look for it where he last found it, not where he watched us hide it.
Can you look at these two glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? You think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass. Now, do you think that this glass has more juice, this glass has more juice, or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more, and why do you think that this one has more?
Because it's taller.
Okay, you ready? Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or do they have the same?
1, 2, 3. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're all the same.
They're the same?
5, 5.
Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more, or do they have the same?
This one has more.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does this row have more quarters?
Because it's more far away.
It's more far away.
Yeah, it's more far away than that. Looks like bigger.
All right, we're gonna play a game with the graham crackers, and we're gonna share them between me and you, okay? Okay. Do you think that we shared those fairly?
No.
No, why not?
You have those and I have this.
Well, what if we try this? Okay, can I put this down right there? Now is it fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, why is it fair now?
Because we both have two.
Can you tell me what you see when you look at that from where you're sitting? What are some of the things that you see?
Okay, before we go on, so that little girl, like her understanding of more and less, it was interesting, right? It wasn't based on the total number the first time, it was based on the space, really. And the second time, it was based on the total number, right? So that's pre-operational. She has a different sense of what's more, what's less, and how it all works. And it's important to remember that when you're working with young children, because what you're saying may not be the way they're understanding the world. You know, it may not be how they process what's going on around them. So this one's really interesting too.
And a cat.
A cat.
And a tree and a bone.
Okay, now we're gonna do the same thing. Can you tell me what you see when you look at it from that stool?
An owl.
An owl?
And him.
What is that?
A goat.
A goat?
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else you see?
Yeah, right there.
Right there, what is that?
A tree.
A tree.
And that's another little tree.
Another little tree?
Yeah, right.
And can you tell me what I see when I look at this from where I'm sitting right here?
Owl.
Okay.
And a goat.
Mm-hmm.
And another tree. And that. And that.
So that's perspective taking. He can't see that she could see something else, right? So a hallmark of one of those first stages of development, sensory motor, is that you are the most important thing. You're the only thing in the world. And as you get a little bit older, that starts to go away a little bit. Around 4 or 5 is when you start to be able to understand that other people outside of you have different perspectives and they are not seeing exactly what you're seeing.
So first we're going to look at these 2 cups right here. Do you think there's the same amount of juice in this glass as there is in that glass? They're even? Okay. So we're going to take the juice from this glass and pour it into this one right here.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to look at this glass and that one. So do you think that there's more juice in this glass, more juice in this glass, or do you think that they have the same amount?
Same amount.
Okay, why do you think that they have the same amount?
Just because this is skinny doesn't mean it's not the same amount. It has the same amount of juice in it, but this one is just wider and this one's skinnier, but they have the same amount of juice.
It says if you hit a glass with a hammer.
So that's the difference between like a 4-year-old and like a 6 or 7-year-old, right? She could tell the difference, or not the difference. She could tell that it was the same. The first girl, you know, just because it was taller, it was more. All right. I'm going to give you a link to all of these because there's more here, but we're not going to watch all of it right now because these kids get a little bit older than we are dealing with. So, okay, we just did that. Ages 2 to 7, symbols represent objects and events. So when you, ages 2 to 7, and this is actually even a little bit older than that, around 3 and 4 is when they start using symbols to represent things like using a block to be a cell phone, or, you know, pretending that things aren't what they are. And using self-talk. 2s, 3s, and 4s talk to themselves a lot. Sometimes you can hear it, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just see little lips moving as they're doing things. And that's a really important developmental process, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then
that's one of the first things I noticed is that my kids at my school don't talk. Like some of them do, but like my level of classroom, like I just wish one of the kids would say owl or goat or. So I have preschool, but I'm in an instructional classroom. So I have more the developmentally delayed autistic Down syndrome children.
Yeah.
And so my children, I'm just wishing they'll groan or moan or say 1 or 2 words. And I'm like, yeah, so hearing it, this little boy, talk about the volcano and all the things around it, I'm like, I just wish they'd say 1 word. I would be excited. So I was just, and you're talking about cognitive development. And so I was like, these are the things we always look for because ours don't necessarily speak. And so learning those other ways that they would be expressing cognitive development is important.
Yeah,
I was just mentioning it while you were here.
Yeah, no, it's really important. And it's important to, with whatever children you're working with, to know that, I mean, one of the things that we'll talk about, I think when we talk about observation and assessment, is to see development happening. It doesn't necessarily have to be this thing happened at this time, but to see that children are developing is really important. The other thing is they're not able to conserve or reverse operations. So they can't figure out how to do something differently or undo something at this point. Once they get older, they'll be able to figure that out.
I think it's really cool because they'll still reenact like their things that they're doing. So like they'll still pick up the cell phone.
Oops, you're muted.
Sorry. They may not say anything, but you know that they understand that that's a cell phone, or they will get the dishes. Like we have full everything that everybody else has. So they will get the dishes and use the blender and pour it into the pot. Like they're mimicking what they see and do with those items, which gives them cognitive, but just doesn't give them the language. And so repeating that language to them and hearing them like kind of not say the word, but syllableize it. I don't know how that, I mean, that's not technically the word, but like either say the first syllable or say a part of the word or say the ending by itself.
And that's something that you need to do with typically functioning kids, probably at younger ages. You know, one job of teachers and parents is to narrate everything you do. To, as you go through your day, oh, now I'm going to go over here and get a glass of water. Oh, you know, in the nursery, talking to babies. Oh, you know, you've got such a poopy diaper. It's time to change that diaper. I'm going to take this one off and put a new one on, because it's, again, that modeling thing that we talked about, but this is positive. Kids need to see you making the words, hear you making the words, and saying the words that relate to what you're doing.
I didn't realize, like when my first year of teaching assistant, when we were changing the diapers of the children that couldn't speak, you actually have to tell them, okay, I'm going to change your diaper. Is that okay? You know, they're not going to say anything, but they can react differently if they don't want you to, or if they're not finished. And so I learned that it was weird because it was during the Growing Strong program that you're supposed to really tell them, like, I'm going to change your diaper right now, because they could easily associate things with different items, or I'm going to change your shirt, and just telling them what you're getting ready to do. It prepares their brain
Yep.
And I was like, wow, I never even thought I'm supposed to tell a 2-year-old that I'm going to change your shirt now. And let's take one leg out, you speak it through. It was really kind of neat. It was a learning thing for me. So I was cool.
I'm that lady at the grocery store who, when I see a parent pushing like even an infant in a baby carrier, and they're talking about all the things they're putting in their cart, or they're pushing their kid in a stroller, and the kid's not even paying any attention, but they're just like, oh, look at the dogs. I'm like, oh, you're such a good parent, you're doing such a good thing for your kid, you don't have any idea how much impact this is making. Even though you feel like such a dork for talking to your infant at the grocery store, this is so important. Okay, so speaking of talking about and with kids, Vygotsky is the developed the social cultural theory, and this is a theory that is about how the things that we do are passed on from generations. Families and social interaction are the primary ways that children develop, and speech and language are tied to children's thinking. So children need to have speech and language to be able to think things through, and that when they're in their early talking stages, first of all, Vygotsky developed stages of language development, one of which is a quiet stage. So kids often go through this, and especially English language learners. So there's a time with many children where they will have been making sounds and saying words and blah, blah, blah. And then they may stop for a while. And that's because they're figuring out, okay, how do I do this the right way? So they may have a quiet stage, and they're figuring out how to really communicate. And then what they do is they narrate what they're doing. So and you've probably seen this, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 2-year-olds too, talking about what's going on. They're at the sandbox, putting sand in the truck and talking about it. And then eventually that becomes internalized, and they don't talk out loud anymore. But if if you think about the way you think things in your head, you just don't say them, right? And this is where my whole like old people versus young people, when you get to be an old person, that self-talk often comes back. I hear a lot of old people talking to themselves about what they're going to do, which I find fascinating. So we'll watch a little bit about Vygotsky. Two things you need to know about Vygotsky are role playing is very important in Vygotskyan theory. Taking on roles, he believed that when you gave children roles and responsibilities, they would sort of rise to their best selves. So often a child who has behavior issues, if you give them a job or a role to play, often their behavior issues sort of subside because they're focused on, this is the thing that I need to do to be this person, or to take on this responsibility. The zone of proximal development they'll talk about, I think, in this first video, which is, this is where a child's development is. This is where we'd like to see it be. In between here is where we can help them, right? And that's called scaffolding. So we'll watch this quickly.
Vygotsky argued that learning impacts development. With early math, for instance, learning skills can hasten development. Rather than viewing this early counting as just rote reciting, Vygotsky would argue that it nudges a child towards a concept of the symbolic nature of number. Children construct knowledge. Learning can lead development. Development cannot be separated from its social context. Language plays a central role in mental development. Vygotsky envisioned a more complex relationship between development and learning than either the young Piaget or the elderly Pavlov had conceived. As we will see, Vygotsky gave great value to assisting children to use strategies to further their intellectual capacities.
The next time we count them, I'm going to help you.
Okay.
Put your finger out and count each one.
1,
2, and help you point.
1, 2, 3, 4.
It is in this context that we will discuss the best known part of Vygotsky's work, the zone of proximal development.
Point to each one close to the bear and count loudly.
1, 2, 3.
But when the teacher structures the activity differently, the same child can perform at a higher level, counting meaningfully to 17 without missing any bears.
15, 16, 17.
Great job, Quentin.
The area between the level of independent performance and the level of assisted performance is the zone of proximal development. It is here where the teacher must focus attention.
Lev Vygotsky was born about 100 years ago in 1896 in Tsarist Russia. As Jews, the Vygotsky family, however prosperous, were outsiders in Russia under Tsar Nicholas, limits on how many could be formally educated. The odds were great, but miraculously, Vygotsky gained a place. He also became interested in psychology and began doing research in this field. He also managed to write 7 books and dozens of articles before dying at age 37 in 1934.
For Vygotsky, the social context influences more than just attitudes and beliefs. It has a profound influence on how we think, as well as what we think. Vygotsky and his colleagues witnessed the rapid social changes in the Soviet Union that occurred when non-technical cultures did to participate in the quite technically advanced Western culture of the new empire. Vygotsky's work reminds us of the processes necessary for children to regulate their own internal and external behavior. Encouraging children to draw what they are experiencing, to talk to each other about it, to write about it, and even to talk to themselves about it, enables them to move towards being independent learners.
Good job, Alex.
Okay, there's another video that I'll have linked that is maybe a little bit more interesting. Vygotsky's theories are way more interesting than it sounds like on that thing. Okay, and we've got a couple more to do. So Yuri Bronfenbrenner, after a while, they all kind of blend together because there are similar parts to all of them. But Yuri Bronfenbrenner was the ecological theory of child development, which is that the closest relationships have the most impact, but the relationships going out from there also have impact. So for an individual, the microsystem is the family, school, parents, child, and then friends of the family, social and legal systems, the neighborhood, right? And then economic conditions, political philosophies, social conditions, cultural values, and then patterns of events, historical conditions over time. So all of those have impact, but the ones that are closest to the child are the ones that have the most impact. And then Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences theory. I'm not going to show you the video for this one, but basically it is that children learn and develop in a bunch of different ways, and that we as teachers need to understand that and work with that. So some kids are going to learn most by moving their bodies, right? Some kids are going to learn most by seeing the information. Some kids are going to learn most by sitting down and talking to somebody about it. So these are ways that we need to understand each child individually and try to help them with the most effective way for them. My daughter, for instance, all through grade school, the only way she could do math was if she sang it. So she would sit at the kitchen table and sing through her math problems, and that worked for her. It probably, I think there's a little bit of her, she's a freshman now, that still does that, but it's internalized now. It's not that self-talk that we talked about before. And then Gasell's maturation theory believed that where you are sort of chronologically determines what your development should be. Your growth happens, and when you develop the skills around that, that's maturation. I'm not going to show you that video, but it's there as well. And then Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you've ever taken a psychology class, you've probably heard of this before. And this like was groundbreaking, but it makes a lot of sense. So you can't learn, you can't develop, you can't focus on learning unless your basic life needs are met, right? The first being food and water, and then safety and security, belonging and love, and then achievement and prestige, and then aesthetic needs, a beautiful, appealing place to be, right? If you have all those things, then you don't have to focus on anything else but the learning, the experiences that you need to have. So this is also in your book, I think. And what we want to do is really focus on giving children all of these things so that they can develop and learn. Okay, key developmental topics. I think we've probably covered all of that. Things that we need to think about, though, are identity as it relates to ethnic and cultural diversity. We need to be responsive to different cultures and respectful of different languages and rituals and experiences that children have. Gender identity is an interesting and evolving area with young children. So 20 years ago, we had boys and girls, and that's just the way it was. Now we think about that a little bit differently. And we need to be respectful and sensitive to children's different gender identities and concerns. Many kids go through a stage where they question or don't understand or are learning about their gender. Some kids, are just not the gender that they were assigned at birth. And so I had a little girl a couple of years ago, she's probably in 4th or 5th grade, who, she said she was a boy. And so we hadn't dealt with that before. Her parents hadn't dealt with that before. We all sort of worked together to try to figure out the best ways to accommodate her, to help her, to be respectful of her. One thing that we quit doing across the board was all the boys line up, all the girls line up. Line up by the color of your shoes or the color of your hair or the kind of shirt you're wearing today. Having people line up, boys and girls, and she would consistently line up with the boys, and the boys would say, "You're not a boy," and she would say, "I am a boy." You don't have to have all of that confusion. Just don't do that one. Okay. And then there are a lot of other issues that are uncharted, resolved as relates to gender identity in young children that people will continue to research and figure out forever, probably. So anyway, the things that you need to learn as a young child are things that are real. You want to have things that have a connection to your life. Now, that doesn't mean you can't learn about dinosaurs because they're not connected to you. You're not going to see a dinosaur. To a lot of children, dinosaurs are very real. And it takes some explanation to know that they lived millions and millions of years ago. Even your grandmas and grandpas didn't ever see dinosaurs. But, you know, how do we make that real? We talk about bones, and you have bones, and, you know, stuff like that. It has to be rewarding. It has to be something that is going to give them acceptance, immediate feedback, like I said, challenge and nurture. It has to build on their lives, connect to their family, children, teachers, learning about their culture and language from family members and other important people in their lives. So your job as a teacher is to support parents and help them learn how to work well with their children. And then learning needs a good stage: physical, emotional, and mental health. Okay, that's that. Any questions? That is a lot of stuff. But those are a lot of names that you're going to hear over and over again, and a lot of ideas that are going to come up again and again and again.
Is this on Moodle? Is this on Moodle?
This
slideshow
is on Moodle, and
okay,
I think you should be able
I've
to.
been snapping pictures, but I'm like, I think she posts it, so
no, it's all there.
not.
It's all there. You should be able to click through to get to the YouTubes, but I'll also put, if I haven't already, put the playlist up there so you can. I've got all the videos there, and there might be even more than what I showed right there. I'm just going to go on because I want to be done at 8 o'clock for you guys. So we're going to talk about developmentally appropriate practice. This won't take too long. Developmentally appropriate practice, and I'm just reading an article, a couple articles right now about developmentally appropriate practice. And is it, are there inherent biases in developmentally appropriate practice? I don't know, because I haven't finished the articles yet. But what we have focused on as teachers of young children for probably the last 15 years or so is making sure that the things that we're doing with children are developmentally appropriate. So we're not giving 3-year-olds, you know, chainsaws. We're not trying to teach 2-year-olds how to write their names. We're not expecting 4-year-olds to read chapter books. That's not developmentally appropriate. So this is the basics of developmentally appropriate practice. I have put a link on Moodle because the National Association of Education for Education of Young Children has updated their developmentally appropriate practice position statement and included some more focus on equity and diversity in their position statement. So it's updated on the website. This is basically the basics of developmentally appropriate practice right here. So what does it mean? It means that we teach young children in ways that meet them where they are as individuals and as a group, taking into account their emotional, physical, social, and cognitive development and characteristics. And we help each child reach challenging and achievable goals that contribute to their ongoing development and learning. So what we're doing is we realize that what makes something challenging and achievable will vary depending on each individual learner's development, her experiences, knowledge, and skills, and the context within which the learning takes place. Let's talk about what that means. Intentionality. An intentional teacher has clearly defined goals for children, chooses teaching strategies that will help children achieve those goals, and continually assesses their progress and adjusts their strategies to reach those goals, and can tell parents, administrators, and colleagues why they're doing what they're doing. These are the 3 ways that you're going to decide what is developmentally appropriate. You're going to consider what's age appropriate. Is what you're trying to do with these children appropriate for the age of the children that you're working with, right? You're not giving worksheets to 2-year-olds. That's not developmentally appropriate. And then what's individually appropriate. So when you look at each child in your classroom, what's developmentally appropriate for a 3-year-old, right? In it sounds like in Kate's classroom, there are developmental delays. And so what may be appropriate for a classroom of mostly typical 3-year-olds may not be appropriate for what she's doing in her classroom.
We definitely have a different style of teaching, and our toys are adapted to their level. And so we've all been through some of the special needs classes here at Millikan, and they talk a lot about things, and ours are more sensory orientated, learning to follow light and being sensory and hearing, just a lot of things that, you still get things done, but you still have to do them at a very slow pace.
Right.
What would normally take a class one day would take us all week. And so you just have to realize that expectation needs to be changed when you walk into the classroom. You can't walk into the class. So for just example, we have a 3rd grade SEEP teacher for our summer school teacher instead of a preschool instructional classroom. And so I am the only TA that works my level that's there. And so we have 3 TAs. And so it's very much reminding them we need to slow down. We wait 10 seconds after each direction, just being that example, and that I feel like I'm teaching the teachers in a sense, but it's just a reminder that, when you walk in, your expectation has to be gone. I mean, we have agenda, but if we don't get to it, it's not because we didn't try. It's because the children have different emotions, and we never know which one they'll have each day. And so their emotions are quite different. So definitely developmentally appropriate is hard, because I walk in, I think we have all these baby toys, and I'm like, but that's their level. Their mentality is 18 months. And so you think about your 18-month-old child, you didn't give them crayons because they would chew on them. You didn't give them a pair of scissors, and leave the table. You just didn't do certain things. Like these kids eat shaving cream, and you use other things that can be edible, like whipped cream instead of shaving cream. So because those things go in mouths, and those things. So it's interesting having to change and incorporate some of those things that you would normally have, sand and water play and these things. That's great. However, it needs to be stuff that it might look like brown sugar instead. So they're going to want to try and eat it. So then we make stuff with brown sugar so that if they do happen to eat it, it's not going to hurt them or harm them. So it's really interesting how to change and adapt. Play-Doh is all edible. You just make your own.
Right.
Flours, sugar, oil. Hey, it's not going to hurt anything. Just going to make them poop a little bit.
What's developmentally appropriate at the beginning of the school year
is not the same 3 months later.
Right, because development happens, right? So I started out in a it was called Little Big Kids. So it was kind of like older toddlers class. And when we started out the year, we couldn't have any little pieces. We couldn't have anything that would go in mouths. But by the end of the year, we could have some of that stuff because their developmental level had, they were able to handle that kind of stuff. So developmentally appropriate, it needs to be gauged toward the kids, right? You can have a classroom that is totally developmentally appropriate for 18-month-olds, and then you get a bunch of 18-month-olds in there and you go, whoa, wait a minute, this is not working. We need to change this. So that's
one of the big goals is to try and get them out of my room. So my room is kind of like a transition room. Mm-hmm. I call it that because I want them to leave as soon as possible. I want them to learn it and go into the regular typical classroom or a blended room where there's still special needs, but it's integrated a little bit better. And so my goal is for you to learn, whether I have to make it an edible item or not, but you get to see that. And then we teach them, even though it's edible, we're not going to put it in our mouth. We're going to play with it on the table to teach them, because the next classroom may not have edible ones. So we want to make sure that, so it's definitely a typical, but we want to try and grow them as fast as possible. And it's amazing. Some kids are in our room for 3 months and some kids are in our room for 2 years. So it's just it's hard to see them go when it's not their typical time to leave after a year. They're gone in 3 months, 6
Yeah.
months, 9 months.
So then the other arm of developmentally appropriate is what's appropriate to the social and cultural context in which the children live. So this is thinking about, is this thing that I'm planning to do with the kids, does it fit in with the culture that they are exposed to? That does it fit in with the social norms of the community? So for instance, if you are I mean, this is super extreme, but if you have a bunch of Muslim or Jewish kids, you're not going to serve pork products, right? That's not developmentally appropriate. You're thinking about what is culturally appropriate here. So, another way of looking at that is the independence that you expect from children. Some cultures really prize independence. They want children to be on their own and doing their own things. Some cultures do not. They really want to nurture and baby those kids as long as they possibly can. And so you need to think about that when you are setting expectations for the kids that you're working with. Are these kids that are going to be able to put their coats on and put their backpacks on, or is that not culturally appropriate in their family or in their world? Is this a thing that, oh, I'll put your coat on you, you know what I mean? So these are things that we need to focus on when we're planning and thinking about the expectations that we have for kids. We know we've talked about this. Children learn through relationships and modeling with adults, hands-on actions, meaningful experiences, and constructing their understandings of the world. That's what we just talked about with all those developmental theories, right? So what we need to do as teachers is think about how we can incorporate making a caring community of learners, making sure that your classroom is a cohesive group that works well together, teaching to enhance development and learning, making sure that the things that you're doing are helping children grow their development and learning, planning appropriate curriculum, assessing their development and learning so that you can see that you are having growth and development, and then developing relationships with their families. When we went back to the developmental theories, the first circle in the Uri Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory of child development, human development, is that family, and then the next one is institutions like schools and stuff. So that all has an impact on children. We're going to talk about some of these things later on when we talk about curriculum essentials, but your physical environment and your schedule needs to make a child feel comfortable and safe and like they know what's happening. Your most important things are that you're providing support and helping children feel like they belong. I'm going to kind of speed it up a little bit. Teaching to enhance development and learning, acknowledging, encouraging, giving specific feedback. I'll post my article, Why Good Job Doesn't Cut It. We say good job all the time. And what we need to be saying are things like, oh my gosh, I love the way you helped everybody put the blocks away, or that was an amazing sandcastle that you built today. You worked really hard on that. Good job is what we say when we're trying to acknowledge that a child did something, but we don't really want to spend a lot of time. We need to give specific feedback to show the children that we are paying attention, that we know what they did, that what they did was good or bad. I did not like the way that you used that block to hit your friend or whatever. Being very specific in what we're talking with children about. Modeling, demonstrating, creating or adding challenge, giving a cue or a hint or other assistance, like oh, everybody needs to put their coats on. Well, you need to try to zip it first. And then if you can't get it, I will help you. Providing information, giving directions. Like Kate said, waiting after you give those directions for the child to process and then do. Scaffolding, support, but don't overdo. Scaffolding was from Vygotsky. Provide the least amount of support a child needs. That's what scaffolding is, to prove that he can do something with a little help, not just get in there and do it so that it's done. Using a large variety or a variety of learning formats, doing large groups, small groups, play and engagement in learning centers, daily routines. We'll talk about that a lot when we talk about environments later on. Planning your appropriate curriculum, thinking about what it is you're trying to do. What do you want the child to get out of this? What developmental aspect do you want? And then how do we get there? Instead of, we do a lot of planning as preschool teachers. Oh, this is fun. Let's do this. That's great. Do fun stuff, but make sure that it has some sort of developmental skill or ability attached to it. And a lot of times it may just be social emotional. It may be that they're learning to share things, or they're learning to work side by side, or it might be a language thing where you're teaching them different vocabulary, or you're just talking about what's going on. But what is the learning element of the activities that you're planning? Think about that. Using the early learning standards. We'll talk about that when we do the learning plan assignment. Okay, I'm going to keep moving fast here. Making meaningful connections, like when you are talking about how this relates to something they know about or care about. Have you ever been to the zoo? Tell me about when you went to the zoo. Considering the developmental paths that children follow, the continuum, right? A toddler who flips through a board book is a reader as much as a 4-year-old who can sound out words along the developmental continuum of reading. And then we will talk about the project approach a lot later on. So I'm going to move along. And then we are observing and assessing all the time, because we want to make sure that the things that we're doing are successful and useful, and that children are developing. And we have a whole lecture about that later on. Making sure, and we have a whole lecture about this one too, making sure you have positive relationships with families. Kids know and understand how they relate to their parents, how they relate to you, and how you and their parents relate to each other. And one of your best, this is kind of cutthroat, but a lot of times one of your best things, especially with older preschoolers, is if your kids know that you know their moms and dads, because right? Because the number of times that I've heard teachers say, do you think
I can make a phone call.
Right. Do you think your mom would like you to be doing that? And they know, they know if you actually know their moms and dads.
Well, and one of them, we take lots of pictures. And so
Oh, yeah.
when I'm in other rooms, I'm like, oh, I can take a picture of this and send it to mom,
Yes.
and excited about it. And they're like, oh, like, nope, yeah. I'm going to change my mind real quick.
Or it's good too, oh my gosh, I've got to take a picture of this thing that you did so that I can show your mom. She's going to love it. One of my favorite teachers always, like, I don't know why she thought this was a thing, but it worked for her all the time. She always used the kid's parents' first name, because it felt like, oh my gosh, if Miss Jennifer knows that my mom's name is Sandy, that she really knows my mom, and it worked. Okay. Oh, I guess I feel like there was more to that, but I guess that's it. Okay. So that is developmentally appropriate practice. Oh no, I was right. There is more. Nope, there's not. Okay. So like I said, we're going to talk about each of these things kind of individually later on in lectures, about working with families, about assessment, and we're going to talk about curriculum, I think, next time. We're going to talk about environments and curriculum essentials. So For next week, you have another assignment due, which is due on the 15th, and it's Approaches to Early Childhood Education assignment. What I have done is I have assigned you each a curriculum type, and you're going to do a little research on it. Similar to what we did with the early childhood historical figures. It says minimum of 10 slides here. If you don't have 10 slides, I'm not going to have a problem with that. I think if you do 6 to 8 slides, you should be in good shape with this one. So what you're going to do is learn about a curriculum type, and then we're going to actually spend some time talking about all the curriculum types and seeing some videos about the curriculum types next week. So I have JC, you have Montessori. Kelsey, you have Reggio Emilia. Kate, you have Waldorf. And Kenzie's going to have High Scope. And I think I will just email that to her. So just the assignment is on Moodle. Take some time, figure out how this is a unique approach. These 4, High Scope is the only one that's really a curriculum. The other 3 are more than a curriculum. They are really an approach to early childhood. So it's much broader than just, this is a book. It's a real way of doing work with children. But we'll spend some time talking about each one after you do your presentations next week. Okay. Anybody have any questions? I just gave you a whole lot of stuff. If you don't have any questions, then I guess we are done for this week, and I will see you next week. Don't forget to do discussions, and
I may have forgot that.
Do it. I will get your grades in tomorrow on your presentations. Okay. All right. Have a good week, everybody. See ya.